Welcome to the Friday edition of Juan's World, and today I thought it would be a good idea to take a look at the genealogies of Jesus as they're represented in the Bible, and they're quite interesting for a number of reasons. I'll also at some point also comment a little bit on the family of Jesus. He is identified as having brothers and sisters in the Gospels, different numbers in different places, and this has caused a lot of problems theologically, particularly with the Catholic Church, who wants to maintain the perpetual virginity of Mary, and so he can't have full siblings. So they have to explain that away, but their reasoning isn't entirely without merit because of some of the problems with translating kinship terms in Aramaic. So genealogy and kinship are pretty much my wheelhouse as an anthropologist. So let's begin on that trail. All right, so the first thing to know about the genealogy of Jesus is that there are two given in the Gospels. The earliest Gospel, Mark, doesn't bother with it, doesn't bother with infancy or anything like that. He just starts with Jesus beginning his ministry and his baptism and then on from there. But Luke and Matthew both have segments about the infancy, which I mentioned in previous videos. Luke giving us the manger story and the shepherds, and Matthew giving us the magi, or the wise men. And putting them together gives us the conventional nativity story. And they give genealogies, and they're quite different, and they're different from each other in two different ways. One of them is that they just don't agree with one another, and that in itself is fairly conclusive proof that the Bible is not inerrant. That is, if Matthew and Luke agreed about the lineage of Jesus, all be fine, but they don't. Where they part company is in the region of King David. The Messiah had to be in the lineage of David, and of course in Luke's Gospel he has to be in the lineage of David because Joseph has to go back to Bethlehem, which is the hometown of the lineage of David, because David was born in Bethlehem, etc., etc., etc. But from there the genealogies diverge pretty significantly. Matthew's genealogy has Jesus descended from David through Solomon, then Rehoboam, and so forth. And Luke's genealogy diverges by having a completely different son of David. He is descended from David through David's son Nathan. And from there the two are just more or less completely different until they come back around the time of Joseph. So anyone who's an inerrantist that believes that there are no errors in the Bible has to reconcile the fact that these two genealogies after David do not agree. Now that's, from my point of view, a minor point, because I'm not an inerrantist. I'm more interested in knowing why the genealogies are there at all. And the much, much, much more important point has to do with where the genealogies start. And that's something, as an anthropologist, I'm always interested in. Genealogies occur, throughout the Bible. But they also occur in many, many cultures for many, many reasons. And when a genealogy is listed, there are two significant points. And this would help you when you're reading Genesis, for example. I know when people read the Bible, and especially when they read Genesis, and it says that Adam begat Cain and Abel and Seth, and they begat, begat. Those parts, a lot of people just say, who cares, and skip them. And I used to do that until I was in graduate school and I was studying the romance tales of Arthur. And I think it was in about only the third or fourth lecture when I was reading one of the French romances, and there was this long, long genealogy, and I just, my eyes glazed over, but I got to class, and the teacher spent an enormous amount of time on the genealogy because he was demonstrating how important the various points in the genealogy are, and the most important point being the beginning point, and the second most important being where the genealogy splits, or in anthropology you would say segments. So the genealogies in both Matthew and Luke don't segment, so we don't have to worry about that. They're what we call patrilineages. They are tracing his lineage back through the male line. But we are interested in where they begin. And there are some other points too, but let me start there. We'll begin at the beginning. Now, Luke's genealogy is in Luke 3:23 to 38. And Matthew's is in the very, very beginning of the book, chapter 1, verses 1 to 17. Now, when we look at the beginning of the genealogies, we actually can infer a lot about what Luke and what Matthew were trying to articulate in their overall Gospels based on these genealogies. The starting point of the genealogy of Matthew is Abraham. And the starting point of Luke's genealogy is Adam. I should maybe stop there and say, so what do you think? Like, so what? Well, the simple answer is that a genealogy is used to prove that the person that you were talking about, in this case Jesus, is descended from somebody who has some kind of significant quality or attribute. What was Abraham? Abraham, as his name in Aramaic tells you, is the father of a people. He was the father of the Israelite nation. So in the contemporary terms of Jesus, Abraham was the founder of the Jews. What about Luke? Going back to Adam. Luke is saying that Jesus is descended from Adam, and Adam was the first human. Of course, Jesus was a Jew as well as being a human. He was both. But Matthew and Luke are making different points because they are both claiming that Jesus is the Messiah, the Savior, but who is he going to save? And Matthew is saying he is the Savior of the Jews. And Luke is saying he's the Savior of all humanity. And from that we can infer that Matthew was a Jew and Luke was not. And so they're making two very, very different points using genealogies. Now the other interesting thing, well, at least from my point of view and from theologians' point of view, is counting generations in genealogies. And the number 7 and the number 10 are very common cycles within genealogies, particularly in Genesis. For example, if we look at the genealogy as identified by Luke, we see that Adam to Noah is 10 generations. And sometimes people refer to Noah as the second Adam because the first Adam and his descendants all populated the earth and did all kinds of things, but God didn't like that, and so he said, okay, I'm going to wipe them all out except Noah and his descendants, and then we'll start again, so that the 10th generation completes the cycle. And that's evidenced sort of in Noah, except that Abraham is the 21st in the cycle. It would be really nice if it was 10 to Noah, 10 to Abraham, and so on and so forth. But Luke's genealogy is just not very neat and tidy like that. And Jesus ends up being number 76 in the genealogy. Now Matthew's much more mathematically precise. Twice through, third time through gets a little squirrely as well. But from Abraham to David, according to Matthew, is 14 generations. 14 is 2 times 7. The 7th generation from Abraham is somebody called Ram, who I don't even know who that is. But the 14th generation is David and Bathsheba. And David and Bathsheba produced Solomon, which starts the cycle again. And the cycle ends, again, it's a little bit awkward, but mostly okay. The 28th generation is Josiah's son, Jeconiah. And it was under Jeconiah that Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians defeated Judah and Jerusalem, sacked the city, deported all of the nobility and the priesthood to Babylon. It's known as the Babylonian captivity or the Babylonian exile, and is a crucial part of the development of Judaism. Absolutely critical. Now, Jeconiah's father, Josiah, was, in many people's opinion, who the historians and the prophets at the time were identifying as the actual Messiah, the anointed king who was going to bring great fortune and power and empire to Judah. But he was killed in battle in a place called Megiddo, which gives us the Aramaic inflection Armageddon, like the Battle of Megiddo, like Armageddon, like the end of the world. But the Babylonian captivity was really fundamental. That happens at at generation 28. So you've got 14 to David, 14 to the Babylonian exile. Now let me just talk about the Babylonian exile for a minute. Up until that time, there was a growing sense in Judah that there was going to be a whole renaissance of the people. The story in the histories, that like the history of Samuel and Kings, suggests that like David was the first king of a united monarchy with its capital in Jerusalem, that according to that history David conquered Jerusalem and made it his capital. And he was first the kingdom of the nation of Judah, which was made up of three and a half tribes of Israel. And there was a northern kingdom of Israel that was made up of, again, sort of like 8, 9.5, roughly speaking. But Israel was completely wiped out in the 8th century by the Assyrians, and the entire, well, not the entire, but most of the people were deported and never heard of again. So they're usually called the 10 lost tribes. And other people, some of the Israelites remained, but other people came in, and that became the area which in Jesus' time was known as Samaria. And the Samaritans and the Judeans were pretty much on bad terms, which is why we get the concept of the Good Samaritan, because when the guy's lying bleeding on the ground after being robbed, the Levite and the priest and all the people who are supposed to be morally upright walk by him, but the Samaritan, who's supposed to be his enemy, comes and helps him out. And that's usually something that doesn't get understood when the story of the Good Samaritan, or the idea of the Good Samaritan, is told. All right, so after Assyria conquered Israel, Judah, which was a pretty isolated mountain kingdom, not terribly prosperous and also not terribly interesting to emperors, was left alone. And it was largely left alone because after the fall of Israel, the kings of Judah just paid taxes to whoever was in charge. Usually it was Assyria, but sometimes it was Egypt. And they just hunkered down and they were all right. But then the prophets arose, and Isaiah was one of the great prophets of the kingdom of Judah. And they started talking about how there was going to be a new king was going to come along and was going to revitalize everything. And that turned out to be Josiah. This gets very complicated. I'll leave it alone. But when he got conquered at Armageddon and killed, and the hopes of a Messiah was dashed, but they thought, well, maybe then a new Messiah that we don't know about is the one who will save us. But then Judah rebelled against Babylon because they were feeling like strong and powerful again, and Nebuchadnezzar just crushed them. And they were deported. They were put into what you might now consider to be sort of isolation camps. And that whole story is the subject of my latest book on Genesis and the development of Judaism, because I and a lot of other scholars, more knowledgeable than I do, believe that it was the Babylonian captivity that cemented the law and the ritual practice and the scriptures that became foundational for Judaism, and that a great many of the subsequent books which we think of as the Talmud and the Midrash, were written in Babylon or subsequent to the Babylonian exile. The exiles did eventually get back, and that's a whole other story. But that is like the second phase for Matthew. So first phase is to David, second phase is to the exile, and then third phase, Jesus. But it doesn't quite fit mathematically, because Jesus comes in the 41st generation, and to get the mathematics right, he ought to be in the 42nd generation. But it's sort of close enough, I guess. Now Luke is just off on his own path altogether. There are no 7s, 14s, 10s, or whatever. He after David, his patrilineage just goes into a whole bunch of different people that we don't know anything about. We don't know anything about them from any other records at all until we get down to Joseph and then Jesus, who is the 76th generation from Adam. And there are no real startling places in the genealogy that stand out. So Luke's idea here seems to be just to be accurate, and to make sure David's in there, of course, because the Messiah has to be of the lineage of David. And so we can say that maybe the only two real key points here are the starting point, Adam and David, and then all the way down to Jesus. And it should be noted that in Luke 3:23 he starts, Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age, being, parens, as was supposed, the son of Joseph. That is, Luke is saying that he's not the biological son of Joseph at all, but he says, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, which was the son of Heli. And then he goes, so he starts with Jesus and works backwards, whereas Matthew works from Abraham and works forward. So that's another way that genealogies can be complicated, is whether you're going to recite them backwards or forwards. Let me talk about that just a tiny bit. Now, there are different kinds of genealogies. The ones that I've been talking about up to now have been what we call patrilines or patrilineages, that is, lines of males, father to son, etc., or son to father, either way. But there are also things like intellectual genealogies, like who taught you, who taught that person, and so forth, or spiritual genealogies, who was your spiritual director, who was that person, and so on. So there's two stories here. One of them concerns something that happened to me when I was a teenager, and I was on a train somewhere. Can't remember where. I was probably going to Oxford or somewhere, at a fair distance, enough that a person would have a chance to talk to somebody else in the carriage, which is not very common in English trains, but sometimes it happens. And I was sitting opposite a man who was well dressed, and he started up a conversation. Turns out he was a Mormon missionary, not a great surprise. And he had with him a Book of Mormon. And he got talking about being a Mormon. And in the process, he opened up the Book of Mormon, and on the flyleaf was a genealogy. It was a genealogy of baptism. And he was at the bottom, and he showed me his name, no idea what his name is at this point. And he said he was baptized by this person, and that person was baptized by this person, and he was baptized by this person, and all the way back to Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism. And he was very proud of that genealogy. And I remember it very clearly because there was a time when I decided to create my own genealogy as an anthropologist. And the interesting thing about American anthropology is that it's gone through many, many phases since the 19th century. But at the turn of the 20th century, there was a German geographer turned anthropologist called Franz Boas, somewhat like the ancestor of David, but with an S rather than a Z. And Franz Boas developed a new kind of anthropology, and he became the father of American anthropology. And at one point I thought it'd be a good idea to trace my lineage back to Boaz. So I did it, and it's not very hard when you've got a lineage of only less than a century. I did my PhD in 1978. And I was directed by James Peacock. James Peacock went to Harvard for his PhD, where he was directed by Cora Dubois. Cora Dubois worked at Berkeley with Alfred Kroeber, and Alfred Kroeber was trained by Franz Boas. So there you go, in very few steps I can get back to Franz Boas. And there was a time when pretty much every American anthropologist or trained in American anthropology could do something similar, could trace the lineage back to Boaz. Not so true anymore because things have gotten very fragmented, and there are other lineages and other traditions that don't matter. But the question is, where do you start your genealogy? Do you start with the person at the beginning, or do you start with yourself? And both the Mormon missionary and me, when I do it, I always start with me, because the lineage is, in a sense, saying this is who I am. And one of the fundamental things that is a bit strange to me about genealogies is that they're saying that whoever is at the top of the lineage is somehow in me. that what Matthew was saying is that that Abraham is in Jesus, you know, and Luke was saying that Adam is in Jesus. And of course, I'm saying is that Franz Boas is in me, which runs rather counter to the idea of natural selection and evolution, where everything changes generation from generation. But there's this sense that the head of the lineage provides an ethos forever. So that's lineages. Now just briefly I want to talk about the family of Jesus. In the Gospels, and several places in all of the Gospels, and also in some of Paul's epistles, there are people mentioned as the brothers of Jesus, and they are James, sometimes called James the Just, who became the head of the church after Jesus was executed, Joseph, Simon, and Jude, sometimes also related to the one known as the apostle, known as Jude the Obscure. That's also a little doubtful. And in Greek, in the Koine Greek of the Gospels, they are called adelphoi, and adelphos, brother, or adelphoi, plural, brothers. It means something similar to what brother means in English. Now you may think brother means same father, same mother, but think about it, it doesn't mean that. It could mean half brother, stepbrother, foster brother, monk, sometimes even brother-in-law. You know, the brother has extensions. And in both Koine Greek and in the Aramaic that Jesus spoke, that was also true. So we cannot say for definite sure that Jesus had real genetic brothers, nor can we say for sure whether they were full siblings or half siblings or step siblings or whatever. But the Bible also says that he had sisters. And this becomes a curious theological point, which the Catholic Church just simply dispensed with by saying, well, Mary was a virgin all of her life, and therefore they had to have been some kind of not full siblings. Maybe they were Joseph's sons and daughters by another marriage before he married Mary. Maybe they were including cousins and, you know, other sort of stray family members or whatever. But my inclination, with no evidence, and where we live in a world these days of no evidence, but I'm going to say it anyway. So just for, you know, the sake of it, I have a tendency to, like, want to believe, I guess, that the people such as James the Just, certainly, maybe also Jude, but James the Just, definitely, he is called specifically James, the brother of Jesus. That's how he's identified in the Gospels. I would like to think that they were really his brothers, full brothers, same mother, same father, and that they admired him, like maybe he was the eldest son, and that he convinced them to help him. Don't know. But anyway, that's me as an anthropologist looking at the Bible, which is what I do a lot. And I hope you enjoyed this little tour around genealogy and kinship. And I'm going to give you some new recipes on Tuesday. I'm planning to do torrone, which I've never done before. It's a form of Italian nougat, which my mother used to call nugget, the old English pronunciation. Very, very, very important in Italy and in Argentina for Christmas. So that's coming up on Tuesday, provided I don't make a complete hash of it and have to rethink. And meanwhile, please, please, please tell your friends in this season, give them the gift of my YouTube videos. They are free, and ask them to like, to subscribe, and come back on Tuesday for a recipe.